Question 1. Implementation of a new emissions control system for a Volkswagen vehicle model intended for the U.S. market requires careful consideration of regulatory compliance. Which of the following approaches best ensures adherence to U.S. environmental regulations and consumer protection laws? Option A. Relying on the emissions control system's performance in internal simulations, assuming it will meet all regulatory requirements without external validation. Option B. Prioritizing rapid deployment of the new system to gain a competitive advantage, with post-launch compliance checks to address any potential issues. Option C. Implementing the system as designed, with the understanding that any necessary modifications can be made through software updates after the vehicles are sold. Option D. Conducting a thorough review of all applicable EPA and state-specific emission standards, engaging with regulatory bodies for pre-approval, and establishing rigorous internal testing protocols before market release. Correct answer is B. Prioritizing rapid deployment of the new system to gain a competitive advantage, with post-launch compliance checks to address any potential issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to streamline operations and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect consumers and market integrity. Volkswagen, as a global automotive manufacturer, operates within a complex web of regulations that vary by region. For this assessment, we will assume the jurisdiction is the United States, governed by agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, as well as state-level consumer protection laws. The challenge lies in ensuring that any implementation, particularly concerning vehicle emissions or safety features, adheres strictly to these regulations without compromising the company's business objectives. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and comprehensive understanding of all applicable U.S. federal and state regulations. This involves thorough legal and technical review, engaging with regulatory bodies early in the development process, and implementing robust internal compliance mechanisms. This approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, thereby mitigating significant risks of fines, recalls, reputational damage, and loss of consumer trust. It aligns with the principles of corporate responsibility and demonstrates a commitment to operating within the established legal framework, which is paramount in the automotive industry. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over regulatory scrutiny would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the introduction of vehicles that do not meet emission standards, resulting in violations of the Clean Air Act and potential EPA enforcement actions, including substantial penalties and mandatory recalls. Similarly, bypassing safety regulations, such as those set by NHTSA, could endanger consumers, leading to product liability lawsuits, recalls, and severe damage to Volkswagen's brand reputation. Another incorrect approach might involve misrepresenting vehicle capabilities or compliance to consumers, which would violate consumer protection laws at both federal and state levels, such as the Federal Trade Commission Act, and could result in deceptive advertising claims and further legal repercussions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory jurisdictions and specific requirements. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment, considering potential legal, financial, and reputational consequences of noncompliance. Engaging legal counsel and compliance experts early and often is crucial. Furthermore, fostering a culture of compliance within the organization, where employees are trained on regulatory obligations and encouraged to report potential issues, is essential for long-term success and ethical operation. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a marketing team at Volkswagen proposes to use customer purchase history data to send targeted promotional emails for new vehicle models. The team believes this is a standard practice for customer engagement. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Volkswagen's commitment to data privacy and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR? Option A. Use the purchase history data for internal analysis only and send generic non-targeted marketing emails to all customers. Option B. Proceed with sending targeted emails based on purchase history, assuming implied consent due to the existing customer relationship. Option C. Obtain explicit, opt-in consent from customers specifically for receiving marketing communications about new vehicle models before sending any emails. Option D. Share the customer purchase history data with third-party marketing agencies to develop and execute the promotional campaign without further customer notification. The correct answer is B. Proceed with sending targeted emails based on purchase history, assuming implied consent due to the existing customer relationship. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a need to assess understanding of Volkswagen's internal compliance framework, specifically concerning data privacy and handling of customer information, as mandated by relevant regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the business need for data utilization with the stringent legal and ethical obligations to protect customer privacy. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these obligations can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and Volkswagen's internal data protection policies. This involves a thorough understanding of consent mechanisms, data minimization principles, and the rights of data subjects. Specifically, it requires ensuring that any use of customer data for marketing purposes is based on explicit, informed consent, and that data is only retained for as long as necessary for the stated purpose. This aligns with the core principles of data protection by design and by default, fostering a culture of compliance. An incorrect approach that involves using customer data for marketing without explicit consent fails to comply with GDPR Article 4, 11, and Article 7, which define the conditions for consent. This constitutes a direct regulatory failure and an ethical breach, as it disrespects individual autonomy and privacy rights. Another incorrect approach, such as retaining customer data indefinitely without a clear legal basis or legitimate interest, violates GDPR Article 5, 1e regarding storage limitation and Article 6 concerning lawful processing. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for data protection principles. A third incorrect approach, which involves sharing customer data with third parties without proper contractual safeguards or consent, contravenes GDPR Chapter V on international data transfers and Article 28 on processor obligations, leading to potential data breaches and further regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant legal and internal policy requirements. This is followed by assessing the specific data processing activity against these requirements, considering the purpose, scope, and duration of data use. If there is any ambiguity or potential for noncompliance, seeking guidance from the data protection officer or legal counsel is paramount. A proactive approach, focusing on transparency and obtaining informed consent, is always preferable to a reactive one that risks violating regulations. Question 3. System analysis indicates that a Volkswagen employee, while reviewing preliminary financial reports not yet released to the public, notices a significant, unannounced change in projected sales figures for a key market. This information, if made public, would likely impact the company's stock price. The employee is considering whether to purchase additional company shares before the official announcement. Which of the following actions best aligns with Volkswagen's internal policies and relevant UK financial regulations? Option A. Dismiss the information as preliminary and proceed with purchasing additional company shares. Option B. Conduct further personal research to verify the accuracy of the sales figures before reporting or trading. Option C. Immediately report the information and the potential trade to the compliance department. Option D. Discuss the information with a trusted colleague to gauge their opinion on the sales figures before deciding whether to trade. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the information and the potential trade to the compliance department. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the interpretation and application of Volkswagen's internal code of conduct and relevant UK financial regulations concerning insider dealing. The challenge lies in discerning whether the information received constitutes inside information, and if so, how to act ethically and legally. The pressure to act quickly and decisively, coupled with the potential for personal gain or loss, requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the information to the compliance department. This aligns with Volkswagen's internal policies, which mandate reporting any potential breaches or suspicious activities. Furthermore, under UK financial regulations, specifically the Market Abuse Regulation (MAR), individuals in possession of inside information are prohibited from dealing in securities or disclosing that information. Reporting to compliance ensures that the company can take appropriate steps to prevent market abuse, protect its reputation, and avoid legal repercussions. This proactive reporting demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which are paramount in the financial services industry. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the information as insignificant and proceed with the trade. This fails to acknowledge the potential for the information to be considered inside information under MAR. If the information were indeed inside information, this action would constitute insider dealing, a criminal offense in the UK, carrying severe penalties including imprisonment and substantial fines. It also violates Volkswagen's Code of Conduct, which emphasizes integrity and compliance. Another incorrect approach is to discuss the information with a trusted colleague before deciding whether to trade. This action risks unlawfully disclosing inside information. Under MAR, disclosing inside information to a third party who is not authorized to receive it is also a form of market abuse. This could lead to disciplinary action from Volkswagen and potential regulatory sanctions for both the individual and the colleague, even if no trade is ultimately made. A third incorrect approach is to conduct further personal research to verify the information before reporting. While due diligence is generally encouraged, in the context of potential inside information, personal investigation without informing the relevant internal department can be problematic. It could be construed as an attempt to exploit the information for personal benefit, or could inadvertently lead to further breaches of confidentiality or market abuse regulations. If the research itself involves seeking information that is not publicly available, primary obligation is to report suspected inside information promptly to the designated authority. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a when in doubt report mindset. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to company policy and regulatory requirements over personal financial considerations. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information. Is it non-public and potentially price-sensitive? 2. Consulting internal policies. What are the company's specific procedures for handling such information? 3. Understanding regulatory obligations. What are the legal requirements regarding inside information and market abuse, e.g., MAR in the UK? 4. Prioritizing reporting. If there is any uncertainty, the immediate and correct course of action is to report to the designated compliance or legal department. 5. Avoiding personal action. Refrain from trading or disclosing the information until cleared by the appropriate internal authority. Question 4. The assessment process reveals that a candidate, during a simulated customer interaction for a new car purchase, has collected the customer's name, address, phone number, and email address. The customer has completed the purchase. The candidate is now considering how to use this information for future marketing efforts, such as sending promotional offers for car servicing or new model releases. What is the most appropriate course of action regarding the customer's personal data for future marketing purposes? Option A. Immediately delete all customer contact information after the sale is finalized to ensure no data privacy concerns arise. Option B. Proceed with sending marketing materials to the customer's address and email, as this information was provided during the sales transaction and is therefore implicitly permitted for marketing. Option C. Share the customer's contact details with a trusted third-party marketing firm that specializes in automotive promotions, assuming the customer would be interested. Option D. Obtain explicit, informed consent from the customer specifically for marketing communications before using their contact details for any promotional activities. Correct answer is D. Obtain explicit, informed consent from the customer specifically for marketing communications before using their contact details for any promotional activities. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a candidate's understanding of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance within the automotive sales environment, specifically concerning customer information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's legitimate business interest with the customer's fundamental right to privacy and data protection. Mismanagement of customer data can lead to severe reputational damage, legal penalties, and a loss of customer trust. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to data protection regulations and ethical principles. Specifically, it acknowledges that customer data is sensitive and its use is strictly governed by law. By seeking explicit consent for any use beyond the immediate transaction, the candidate demonstrates an understanding of data minimization principles and the importance of informed consent, which are cornerstones of data privacy frameworks. This proactive and compliant stance protects both the customer and the company. An incorrect approach that involves sharing customer contact details with a third-party marketing firm without explicit consent represents a direct violation of data protection laws. Such actions would likely breach regulations requiring lawful processing of personal data, often necessitating consent or a legitimate interest that is not overridden by the individual's rights. Ethically, it is a breach of trust and a failure to respect the customer's privacy. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume consent based on the sales transaction, is also professionally unacceptable. Many data protection laws require specific, affirmative consent, not implied consent, for marketing purposes. Relying on assumptions can lead to significant legal repercussions and damage the company's reputation. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves deleting all customer data immediately after the sale, without considering potential legitimate follow-up or warranty information, might be overly cautious and could hinder legitimate business operations or customer service. While data minimization is important, complete erasure without a clear policy or consideration for necessary follow-up could be detrimental. The professional reasoning process should involve 1. Identifying the core ethical and regulatory issue, data privacy and consent. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and applicable data protection legislation. 3. Prioritizing customer rights and consent. 4. Seeking clarification or guidance if unsure about the appropriate course of action. Question 5. Investigation of a candidate's application for a role at Volkswagen has revealed a discrepancy between their self-reported qualifications and information provided by a previous employer during a preliminary background check. The hiring manager is concerned about potential misrepresentation and wants to proceed with the hiring process quickly to secure the candidate. What is the most appropriate course of action according to the regulatory framework governing Volkswagen's hiring assessments? Option A. Immediately withdraw the job offer to avoid any potential issues related to misrepresentation without further investigation. Option B. Proceed with hiring the candidate as planned, assuming the discrepancy is minor and unlikely to impact job performance to expedite the recruitment process. Option C. Request the candidate to provide a written explanation for the discrepancy and make a hiring decision based solely on their response, without independent verification. Option D. Conduct a thorough, impartial investigation to verify the discrepancy, interviewing both the candidate and the previous employer, and reviewing all supporting documentation before making a final hiring decision. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough, impartial investigation to verify the discrepancy, interviewing both the candidate and the previous employer, and reviewing all supporting documentation before making a final hiring decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to quickly resolve a potential issue and the regulatory obligation to conduct a thorough and impartial investigation. The pressure to minimize reputational damage and financial impact can lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the process. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests while upholding regulatory compliance and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, evidence-based investigation that adheres strictly to the principles of fairness, objectivity, and due process, as mandated by the Volkswagen Hiring Assessment Test's regulatory framework. This means gathering all relevant information, interviewing all parties involved without prejudice, and objectively assessing the findings against established criteria. This approach ensures that decisions are based on facts, not assumptions or external pressures, thereby protecting the company from potential regulatory sanctions and maintaining its reputation for integrity. It aligns with the ethical imperative to treat all individuals fairly and to conduct business in a transparent and accountable manner. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately dismissing the candidate based on a single, unverified complaint. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a fair and thorough assessment process. It is ethically unsound as it presumes guilt without due process and can lead to discriminatory practices. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial review, focusing only on information that supports a predetermined outcome. This violates the principle of objectivity and can result in biased decision-making, which is a direct contravention of regulatory guidelines that demand impartial evaluation. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for the candidate's rights. A third incorrect approach is to delay the investigation indefinitely, hoping the issue will resolve itself. This is professionally negligent and can lead to regulatory noncompliance if the delay prevents timely action or if the situation escalates. Ethically, it shows a lack of responsibility and can harm both the candidate and the company by leaving the matter unresolved. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the core issue and the relevant regulatory framework. Second, they should gather all available information objectively, without prejudgment. Third, they must analyze this information against the established criteria and policies. Fourth, they should consult with relevant stakeholders or legal counsel if the situation is complex or carries significant risk. Finally, they must document their findings and decisions thoroughly, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the process. This systematic approach mitigates risks, ensures compliance, and upholds professional integrity. Question 6. What factors determine the appropriate timing and content of a public announcement regarding a significant positive development for Volkswagen, considering the need to comply with market abuse regulations and ensure fair disclosure to all investors? Option A. The completeness and accuracy of the information, the potential for selective disclosure, and the requirement for simultaneous dissemination to the public. Option B. The personal opinion of senior management on the market's likely reaction to the news. Option C. The speed at which the positive news can be communicated to key stakeholders to boost investor confidence. Option D. The extent to which the announcement can be framed to highlight only the most favorable aspects of the development. The correct answer is A. The completeness and accuracy of the information, the potential for selective disclosure, and the requirement for simultaneous dissemination to the public. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the regulatory obligation to ensure accuracy and prevent market abuse. The pressure to release positive news quickly can lead to overlooking potential misinterpretations or the need for further clarification, which could inadvertently mislead investors or create an unfair advantage for those with early, incomplete information. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements for fair disclosure and market integrity. This involves a thorough review process to ensure all information is accurate, complete, and presented in a manner that is accessible to all market participants simultaneously. This aligns with the principles of market abuse regulations, such as the UK's Market Abuse Regulation, MAR, which mandates that issuers of financial instruments must inform the public as soon as possible of inside information that directly concerns them. The process ensures that no selective disclosure occurs, preventing insider dealing and maintaining investor confidence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves releasing the information immediately without a comprehensive review. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation of ensuring accuracy and completeness, potentially leading to misleading statements. It also risks selective disclosure if certain parties receive the information before others, violating fair disclosure principles and increasing the risk of market abuse. Another incorrect approach is to delay the release indefinitely due to minor concerns about potential negative interpretations. While thoroughness is important, an indefinite delay can also be detrimental. It can lead to a lack of transparency, frustrate investors, and potentially create a vacuum where rumors and speculation can thrive, which is also counterproductive to market integrity. Furthermore, if the information is material, an unjustified delay could be seen as an attempt to manipulate market perception. A third incorrect approach is to release only a partial summary of the positive aspects while omitting any nuances or potential challenges. This is a form of selective disclosure and misrepresentation. It fails to provide a balanced and complete picture, which is essential for informed investment decisions, and can be considered a breach of the duty to provide accurate and non-misleading information. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that involves 1. Identifying the material nature of the information and its potential impact on the market. 2. Consulting relevant internal compliance and legal teams to understand disclosure obligations under applicable regulations, e.g., MAR in the UK. 3. Developing a clear and accurate communication strategy that ensures simultaneous dissemination to all market participants. 4. Implementing a robust review process involving all relevant stakeholders to verify accuracy and completeness before release. 5. Establishing a clear timeline for disclosure, balancing the need for promptness with regulatory compliance. Question 7. When evaluating proposed marketing materials for a new vehicle model, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with advertising regulations and ethical standards, particularly when faced with pressure to maximize sales impact? Option A. Ensure all claims made about the vehicle's performance, features, and benefits are factually accurate, substantiated by evidence, and that any significant limitations or potential drawbacks are clearly and conspicuously disclosed to consumers. Option B. Utilize a range of positive customer testimonials and expert reviews, prioritizing those that express the strongest enthusiasm for the vehicle, even if they represent a minority of opinions. Option C. Focus on creating compelling narratives and emotional appeals that highlight the aspirational aspects of owning the vehicle, with minimal emphasis on technical specifications or potential downsides. Option D. Employ broad, generalized statements about the vehicle's quality and desirability that are difficult to disprove, allowing for flexibility in interpretation by potential buyers. The correct answer is A. Ensure all claims made about the vehicle's performance, features, and benefits are factually accurate, substantiated by evidence, and that any significant limitations or potential drawbacks are clearly and conspicuously disclosed to consumers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to promote its products and the regulatory obligation to provide accurate and balanced information to consumers. The pressure to meet sales targets can lead to a temptation to overstate benefits or downplay risks, which directly contravenes ethical conduct and regulatory requirements. Navigating this requires a strong understanding of advertising standards and a commitment to consumer protection. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes factual accuracy and transparency in all marketing communications. This aligns with the principles of fair advertising and consumer protection, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and integrity in the automotive industry. By ensuring that all claims are substantiated and that potential drawbacks are disclosed appropriately, the company upholds its regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. This approach fosters long-term customer loyalty and avoids potential legal repercussions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves selectively highlighting positive features while omitting any mention of potential drawbacks or limitations. This constitutes misleading advertising, as it creates an incomplete and potentially deceptive impression of the product's capabilities or suitability. Such an action violates regulations that mandate fair and truthful representation of goods and services. Another incorrect approach is to use vague or ambiguous language that can be interpreted in multiple ways, allowing the company to later claim it did not explicitly make a false statement. This tactic, while appearing clever, is ethically questionable and often falls foul of advertising standards that require clarity and specificity in claims. It undermines consumer understanding and can lead to dissatisfaction and disputes. A further incorrect approach is to rely on testimonials or endorsements without verifying their authenticity or ensuring they are representative of typical customer experiences. If testimonials are fabricated or cherry-picked to present an overly positive, unrepresentative view, this amounts to deceptive practice. Regulations typically require that endorsements be genuine and reflect honest opinions or experiences. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable advertising regulations and ethical guidelines. They must then critically assess all proposed marketing materials against these standards, focusing on the clarity, accuracy, and completeness of the information presented. A key step is to ask, would a reasonable consumer understand this information accurately and without being misled? If there is any doubt, the material should be revised or rejected. Seeking legal or compliance department review for complex claims is also a crucial part of due diligence. The ultimate goal is to ensure that marketing efforts are both effective and compliant, safeguarding both the company's reputation and consumer interests. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant shortfall in the sales of a particular investment product, with the team currently 15% below target for the quarter. Your manager has emphasized the need to close this gap, suggesting that highlighting the product's historical performance and potential upside, while briefly mentioning the risks as standard market fluctuations, might be an effective strategy to boost sales. You are aware that this product carries a moderate level of risk, including the possibility of capital loss, which has not been fully elaborated upon in the standard sales materials. How should you proceed to address the sales shortfall while adhering to professional and regulatory standards? Option A. Emphasize the product's historical performance and potential upside, as suggested by your manager, and briefly mention risks as standard market fluctuations to encourage sales and meet the quarterly target. Option B. Focus on providing a balanced presentation of the investment product, clearly outlining both its potential benefits and the associated risks, including the possibility of capital loss, ensuring the client understands the full picture before making any decision. Option C. Create a sense of urgency by implying that the current favorable market conditions for this product will not last, encouraging clients to invest quickly to capitalize on the opportunity. Option D. Suggest alternative, lower-risk products to clients who may not be suitable for this particular investment, even if it means not meeting the sales target for the emphasized product. The correct answer is B. Focus on providing a balanced presentation of the investment product, clearly outlining both its potential benefits and the associated risks, including the possibility of capital loss, ensuring the client understands the full picture before making any decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving short-term sales targets and upholding long-term customer trust and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet performance metrics can incentivize ethically questionable behavior, requiring careful judgment to balance business objectives with professional integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and customer well-being, aligning with the principles of fair dealing and consumer protection mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial advice and sales practices. Specifically, it adheres to guidelines that require advisors to act in the best interests of their clients and to provide clear, accurate, and not misleading information. This approach fosters a sustainable business model built on trust and ethical conduct, which is crucial for long-term success and reputation. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying the risks associated with a product to meet sales targets represents a failure to act in the client's best interest. This is a direct violation of ethical duties and potentially regulatory requirements that mandate suitability and disclosure. Such behavior can lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory sanctions, and legal liabilities. Another incorrect approach, which is to focus solely on the product's potential benefits without adequately explaining its drawbacks or the associated risks, is misleading. This constitutes a breach of the duty to provide complete and balanced information, which is a cornerstone of ethical sales practices and regulatory compliance. It can result in clients making uninformed decisions, leading to financial harm and subsequent complaints. A further incorrect approach, which is to pressure a client into a purchase by creating a false sense of urgency or implying that the offer will not be available later, is manipulative. This tactic undermines the client's ability to make a considered decision and is often considered an unfair commercial practice, violating consumer protection laws and ethical codes of conduct. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the regulatory obligations and ethical principles governing the role. Before engaging with a client, professionals should review the product's features, benefits, and risks thoroughly. During client interactions, active listening and a focus on understanding the client's needs and risk tolerance are paramount. Any communication must be clear, accurate, and balanced, avoiding jargon and ensuring the client fully comprehends the implications of their decision. If faced with pressure to compromise ethical standards or regulatory requirements to meet targets, professionals should escalate concerns through appropriate internal channels and seek guidance. Prioritizing client interests and regulatory compliance over short-term gains is essential for maintaining professional integrity and long-term career sustainability. Question 9. Market research demonstrates a significant surge in positive customer sentiment regarding a new product feature, with many customers sharing enthusiastic testimonials on social media. The marketing department proposes launching an immediate, high-impact advertising campaign heavily featuring these testimonials, aiming to capitalize on the current buzz and drive sales. However, the legal and compliance team has not yet had the opportunity to review the specific wording and context of these testimonials for their suitability in a formal advertising campaign. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company? Option A. Modify the customer testimonials slightly to make them more impactful and aligned with the company's desired marketing message before launching the campaign. Option B. Proceed with the advertising campaign as proposed, leveraging the immediate positive sentiment to maximize sales, with a plan to address any potential compliance issues if they arise later. Option C. Delay the advertising campaign until the legal and compliance team has thoroughly reviewed all proposed testimonials and marketing materials to ensure full adherence to advertising regulations and ethical standards. Option D. Launch the advertising campaign using only a select few of the most enthusiastic testimonials, assuming that positive customer feedback inherently implies compliance. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the advertising campaign as proposed, leveraging the immediate positive sentiment to maximize sales, with a plan to address any potential compliance issues if they arise later. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to leverage positive customer sentiment and the regulatory obligation to ensure marketing communications are fair, clear, and not misleading. The pressure to quickly capitalize on a positive trend, especially in a competitive market, can lead to overlooking potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial objectives with the stringent requirements of consumer protection regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing a thorough review of the proposed marketing campaign against the relevant regulatory framework before its launch. This involves ensuring that any claims made are substantiated, that customer testimonials are presented accurately and without exaggeration, and that the overall message does not create a misleading impression. This proactive compliance measure aligns with the principles of responsible marketing and upholds the company's duty to consumers, as mandated by regulations designed to prevent deceptive practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the campaign immediately based on the positive sentiment, without verifying the accuracy or potential for misinterpretation of customer feedback. This failure to conduct due diligence constitutes a regulatory risk, as it could lead to misleading advertising if the testimonials, when taken out of context or amplified, create an unrealistic expectation for potential customers. Ethically, it breaches the principle of honesty in advertising. Another incorrect approach is to modify the customer feedback to better fit the desired marketing narrative. This is a direct violation of regulations prohibiting the manipulation of evidence or the creation of false endorsements. It is ethically unsound as it constitutes deception and undermines the trust consumers place in reviews and testimonials. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the potential sales uplift without considering the regulatory implications of the marketing message. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the interconnectedness of commercial strategy and legal compliance. It risks significant reputational damage and potential fines if the campaign is found to be in breach of advertising standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that integrates compliance checks at every stage of campaign development. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to marketing and advertising. 2. Conducting a risk assessment of proposed marketing materials, considering potential interpretations by consumers. 3. Seeking legal and compliance review for any campaign that makes claims or uses testimonials. 4. Prioritizing transparency and accuracy over aggressive sales tactics. 5. Establishing clear internal processes for campaign approval that include a compliance sign-off. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates a recurring pattern of sales representatives exceeding approved marketing material guidelines to meet aggressive quarterly targets. This practice, while boosting short-term sales, has been flagged as a potential breach of advertising standards stipulated within the Volkswagen hiring assessment tests regulatory framework. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the head of sales? Option A. Immediately implement a mandatory retraining program for all sales staff on approved marketing material usage and establish a stricter approval process for any deviations, while simultaneously initiating a review of the sales incentive structure to ensure it does not inadvertently encourage noncompliance. Option B. Instruct the marketing department to relax the guidelines for approved materials to better align with the sales team's current practices, thereby reducing the perceived need for deviation. Option C. Issue a stern memo to all sales staff reiterating the importance of adhering to marketing guidelines and warning of disciplinary action for future violations, with no immediate changes to the incentive structure. Option D. Focus solely on achieving the quarterly sales targets and address the marketing material issue in the next annual review cycle, assuming the current breaches are minor and unlikely to attract regulatory attention. The correct answer is A. Immediately implement a mandatory retraining program for all sales staff on approved marketing material usage and establish a stricter approval process for any deviations, while simultaneously initiating a review of the sales incentive structure to ensure it does not inadvertently encourage noncompliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and maintaining robust regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet sales targets can inadvertently lead to overlooking or downplaying potential compliance risks, requiring a professional to exercise sound judgment and prioritize adherence to established frameworks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified governance weakness by initiating a comprehensive review and implementing corrective actions. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to upholding the integrity of the company's operations and adhering to the Volkswagen hiring assessment tests regulatory framework, which mandates a culture of compliance and continuous improvement. By seeking expert advice and engaging relevant stakeholders, the professional ensures that the remediation efforts are thorough, effective, and aligned with regulatory expectations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate sales performance without addressing the underlying governance issue fails to acknowledge the seriousness of the identified weakness. This could lead to a recurrence of the problem and potential regulatory sanctions, as it neglects the fundamental principle of embedding compliance into business processes. Another incorrect approach that involves superficial changes or attempts to conceal the issue would be a direct violation of ethical principles and regulatory requirements for transparency and accountability. Such actions undermine trust and expose the organization to significant legal and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach that delays action or assigns responsibility without clear accountability risks, allowing the compliance gap to widen, increasing the likelihood of future breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment, regulatory adherence, and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Volkswagen hiring assessment tests regulatory framework, identifying potential compliance gaps, evaluating the severity of identified risks, and developing a clear action plan with defined responsibilities and timelines. Seeking guidance from compliance officers or legal counsel when uncertainties arise is crucial. Ultimately, fostering a culture where compliance is seen as an enabler of sustainable business success, rather than an impediment, is paramount. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates a significant backlog in customer complaint processing. To expedite analysis and identify systemic issues, management proposes sharing raw complaint data, which includes personal customer details, with an internal analytics team. The analytics team requires this data to identify trends and root causes. However, the applicable regulatory framework strictly governs the processing of personal data, requiring appropriate safeguards to be in place. What is the most appropriate course of action to balance the need for operational efficiency with regulatory compliance? Option A. Implement robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques on the complaint data before it is shared with the analytics team. Option B. Delay all data analysis until a perfect, fully compliant anonymization process can be developed and implemented, even if it means significant delays in complaint resolution. Option C. Provide the analytics team with access to the raw complaint data, assuming they will handle it responsibly due to their professional roles. Option D. Share the raw complaint data directly with the analytics team, as internal access for business analysis is generally permissible. The correct answer is A. Implement robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques on the complaint data before it is shared with the analytics team. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives, efficiently processing customer complaints, and adhering to strict regulatory requirements for data handling and customer protection. The pressure to reduce backlogs can lead to shortcuts that compromise compliance, necessitating a careful balance between operational efficiency and legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes regulatory compliance by ensuring that all customer data, including sensitive personal information within complaint records, is handled according to the specified data protection laws. This involves implementing robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques before data is accessed by a wider team for analysis. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that personal data is only processed for specific, legitimate purposes and is adequately protected against unauthorized access or disclosure. This proactive measure prevents potential breaches and upholds customer trust, which is a cornerstone of ethical business practice and regulatory adherence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly sharing raw complaint data with the analytics team without any form of anonymization or pseudonymization. This directly violates data protection regulations by exposing sensitive customer information unnecessarily. It creates a significant risk of data breaches, leading to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for customer privacy. Another incorrect approach is to delay the analysis of complaints indefinitely until a perfect, fully compliant anonymization process can be developed. While compliance is paramount, an indefinite delay can lead to customer dissatisfaction due to unaddressed issues and may also contravene regulations that mandate timely complaint resolution. This approach fails to balance compliance with operational necessity and customer service expectations. A third incorrect approach is to assume that internal access by an analytics team inherently constitutes a legitimate business purpose that negates the need for data protection measures. This is a dangerous assumption that overlooks the specific requirements of data protection laws, which often mandate safeguards even for internal processing, especially when dealing with personal data. It fails to recognize that legitimate business purpose is not a blanket exemption from data protection obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a risk-based approach. First, identify all applicable regulations and their specific requirements regarding data handling and customer information. Second, assess the potential risks associated with different data processing activities, including the likelihood and impact of data breaches. Third, develop and implement proportionate controls and safeguards that mitigate these risks while still allowing for necessary business operations. In this case, the professional decision-making process involves consulting with legal and compliance teams to determine the most effective and compliant methods for data anonymization or pseudonymization, ensuring that the analytics team receives data that is both useful for their analysis and fully compliant with regulatory mandates. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates the collection of candidate keystroke data, browsing history on assessment platforms, and facial recognition data during the Volkswagen hiring assessment test. This data is stored indefinitely and may be shared with third-party analytics firms for broader market research purposes unrelated to the candidate's suitability for the role. Which of the following best describes the regulatory and ethical implications of this system? Option A. The system is compliant as long as candidates are informed about the data collection, regardless of the specific types of data collected or their subsequent use, as consent overrides data protection regulations. Option B. The system likely violates data minimization and purpose limitation principles under GDPR, as well as potentially breaching the SISI Code of Conduct regarding integrity and responsible data handling due to excessive data collection, indefinite storage, and unauthorized secondary use. Option C. The system's primary focus on assessment validity justifies the extensive data collection and sharing, as the benefits of identifying top talent outweigh potential privacy concerns. Option D. The system adheres to best practices by collecting comprehensive data to ensure the most suitable candidate is identified, and indefinite storage with third-party sharing is acceptable for improving future assessment methodologies. The correct answer is D. The system adheres to best practices by collecting comprehensive data to ensure the most suitable candidate is identified, and indefinite storage with third-party sharing is acceptable for improving future assessment methodologies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient data collection with the imperative of regulatory compliance and data privacy. The Volkswagen hiring assessment test, operating within a specific regulatory framework, which we will assume for this example, is the UK's GDPR and the CISI Code of Conduct. As these are common in professional assessments, mandates strict adherence to data protection principles. The challenge lies in identifying potential breaches of these principles within the described monitoring system. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes data minimization and purpose limitation, core tenets of GDPR, by ensuring that only necessary data is collected and that its use is strictly confined to the stated purpose of assessing candidate suitability. This approach upholds the candidate's right to privacy and avoids potential misuse of their information. This aligns with the CISI Code of Conduct's emphasis on integrity and acting in the best interests of clients and the public, which extends to candidates in a hiring process. An incorrect approach that involves collecting a broad range of personal data beyond what is strictly necessary for the assessment fails to adhere to the principle of data minimization. This could lead to a breach of GDPR Article 5(1)(c), which states that personal data shall be adequate, relevant, and not excessive in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Ethically, it raises concerns about overreach and potential for future misuse of sensitive information. Another incorrect approach that allows for the data to be used for purposes other than the hiring assessment, such as marketing or profiling unrelated to the role, directly violates the principle of purpose limitation, GDPR Article 5(1)(b). This is a significant regulatory failure and an ethical breach, as it misrepresents the intended use of the data to the candidates and erodes trust. A third incorrect approach that fails to implement robust security measures for the collected data exposes it to unauthorized access or disclosure. This is a direct contravention of GDPR Article 32, which mandates appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. Such a failure can lead to severe reputational damage and legal penalties. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework, e.g., GDPR, CISI Code of Conduct. Professionals must conduct a Data Protection Impact Assessment (DPIA) for any new monitoring systems, identifying potential risks and implementing mitigation strategies. They should always err on the side of caution, adopting a privacy by design and privacy by default approach. Transparency with candidates about what data is collected, why, and how it will be used is paramount. Regular audits of data collection and processing activities are also essential to ensure ongoing compliance. Question 13. Process analysis reveals that a significant number of customer complaints regarding a specific vehicle feature are being informally handled by regional sales managers, with resolutions often based on individual discretion rather than a standardized procedure. This approach, while seemingly efficient in the short term, lacks formal documentation and consistent application across different regions. Considering the regulatory framework governing automotive manufacturers, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure robust compliance and mitigate future risks? Option A. Encourage regional sales managers to develop their own localized complaint handling procedures that best suit their specific market conditions. Option B. Implement a centralized, documented complaint handling system that mandates thorough investigation, record keeping, and consistent resolution protocols for all customer feedback, regardless of perceived severity. Option C. Focus resources on addressing only those complaints that have already resulted in significant customer dissatisfaction or have attracted regulatory attention. Option D. Advise regional sales managers to continue their current informal approach, but to make a greater effort to document their individual resolutions for future reference. The correct answer is B. Implement a centralized documented complaint handling system that mandates thorough investigation, record keeping, and consistent resolution protocols for all customer feedback, regardless of perceived severity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from the inherent tension between achieving business objectives and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The pressure to meet sales targets can inadvertently lead to overlooking or downplaying compliance obligations. The challenge lies in balancing the need for commercial success with the non-negotiable duty to act with integrity and within the bounds of the law. A professional in this situation must exercise sound judgment, recognizing that short-term gains achieved through non-compliance carry significant long-term risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes the thorough investigation and documentation of customer complaints, regardless of their perceived severity or frequency. This aligns with the Volkswagen hiring assessment test's emphasis on regulatory compliance, which mandates that all customer concerns be treated with due diligence. By meticulously recording and analyzing each complaint, the company demonstrates a commitment to identifying systemic issues and taking corrective action. This proactive stance not only fulfills regulatory obligations, but also fosters customer trust and mitigates potential reputational damage and future liabilities. It reflects best professional practice by embedding a culture of accountability and continuous improvement within the organization. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing complaints that appear to be isolated incidents or are from customers perceived as difficult. This fails to acknowledge that even seemingly minor issues can be indicative of broader compliance failures or emerging trends. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care owed to customers and regulators. From a regulatory standpoint, it violates the principle of treating customers fairly and can lead to penalties if a pattern of such dismissals is discovered. Another incorrect approach is to address complaints only when they escalate to formal legal action or significant regulatory scrutiny. This reactive stance is a clear abdication of proactive compliance responsibilities. It demonstrates a disregard for the spirit of regulatory frameworks, which are designed to prevent harm before it occurs. Such an approach is ethically questionable as it prioritizes cost saving over customer welfare and regulatory adherence, and legally it can result in more severe sanctions due to the delayed response. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or informal discussions to address customer concerns, without establishing a formal process for logging, investigating, and resolving them. This lack of structured procedure makes it impossible to track trends, identify root causes, or demonstrate to regulators that a robust compliance system is in place. It is professionally unsound because it lacks the rigor required for effective risk management and compliance oversight. Ethically, it fails to provide a transparent and accountable mechanism for addressing customer grievances. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory obligations applicable to Volkswagen in its operating jurisdiction. This involves familiarizing oneself with the relevant laws and guidelines governing customer relations, product safety, and data protection. The next step is to establish clear, documented procedures for handling all customer interactions, including complaints. These procedures should mandate thorough investigation, timely communication, and appropriate resolution. Regular training for all staff involved in customer-facing roles is crucial to ensure consistent application of these procedures. Furthermore, a system for monitoring and analyzing complaint data should be implemented to identify patterns and proactively address potential compliance risks. Finally, fostering an open communication culture where employees feel empowered to raise compliance concerns without fear of reprisal is essential for effective regulatory adherence. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that launching a new investment product could significantly increase revenue, but the product's structure involves novel financial instruments that may not be explicitly covered by existing regulatory guidance. The product development team is eager to proceed quickly to gain a first-mover advantage. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance? Option A. Focus on the projected revenue and market share gains, and only engage legal and compliance teams if regulators initiate an inquiry. Option B. Delay the launch until a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment is completed by internal and external legal and compliance experts, and any necessary product modifications are made to ensure full adherence to relevant financial regulations. Option C. Proceed with the launch after a high-level review by the legal department, assuming that if a specific prohibition isn't found, the product is compliant. Option D. Launch the product and address any potential regulatory concerns that arise post-launch, relying on the company's strong reputation to mitigate any immediate issues. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the launch after a high-level review by the legal department, assuming that if a specific prohibition isn't found, the product is compliant. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the potential financial benefits of a new product launch against the significant risks associated with non-compliance with stringent financial regulations. The pressure to innovate and capture market share can create a conflict with the imperative to ensure all regulatory requirements are met, especially when those requirements are complex and evolving. Careful judgment is needed to avoid shortcuts that could lead to severe penalties. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and proactive assessment of regulatory compliance. This involves engaging legal and compliance teams early in the product development lifecycle, conducting detailed impact assessments, and building compliance into the product design from the outset. This aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory standards, thereby mitigating legal, financial, and reputational risks. It reflects a culture of compliance that is essential in the financial services industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue without adequately considering the regulatory landscape is professionally unacceptable. This failure to integrate compliance into the early stages of product development can lead to significant regulatory breaches. Specifically, it could result in fines, sanctions, reputational damage, and even the inability to launch the product. Another incorrect approach that relies on a superficial review of regulations or assumes existing compliance frameworks are sufficient without specific validation for the new product is also flawed. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can lead to unforeseen compliance gaps. A third incorrect approach that delays regulatory consultation until after the product is developed is a critical error. This reactive stance often results in costly redesigns, delays, and potential noncompliance, as the product may not be adaptable to regulatory demands discovered late in the process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulatory obligations. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, considering both the likelihood and impact of noncompliance. Early and continuous engagement with legal and compliance experts is crucial. Furthermore, a proactive approach to embedding compliance into the product development process, rather than treating it as an afterthought, is essential for sustainable success and ethical conduct. Question 15. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a new automotive component developed by Volkswagen is technologically innovative and expected to significantly boost market share. However, preliminary internal testing has revealed some minor anomalies that have not yet been fully investigated. The product development team is eager to proceed with the launch to capitalize on market momentum, but the compliance department has raised concerns about the completeness of the pre-launch regulatory review process. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to the regulatory framework and ethical best practices for Volkswagen? Option A. Proceed with the product launch as planned, with a commitment to address any identified anomalies post-launch through a rapid response team. Option B. Seek an exemption from certain regulatory review requirements based on the product's innovative nature and potential market benefits. Option C. Expedite the remaining regulatory review processes by focusing only on the most critical compliance areas, assuming minor anomalies will not pose significant risks. Option D. Halt the product launch immediately and conduct a comprehensive investigation into all anomalies, ensuring full compliance with all relevant regulatory standards before any further steps are taken. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the product launch as planned, with a commitment to address any identified anomalies post-launch through a rapid response team. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a business imperative, launching a new product, and the regulatory requirement for thorough due diligence. The pressure to meet market demands can tempt individuals to bypass or expedite compliance processes, leading to significant risks. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with the absolute necessity of adhering to regulatory frameworks designed to protect consumers and market integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. By engaging the compliance department and ensuring all necessary checks are completed before product launch, the individual demonstrates a commitment to upholding the Volkswagen hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. This proactive stance prevents potential breaches, reputational damage, and legal repercussions. It aligns with the principle of conduct risk, which emphasizes the importance of acting with integrity and in accordance with regulatory expectations. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over compliance would represent a failure to adhere to the Volkswagen hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. This could manifest as a breach of internal policies and procedures designed to ensure product safety and market suitability. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for consumer protection and fair market practices. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to interpret regulations to fit the desired timeline, is a direct violation of the principle of regulatory adherence. Regulations are not subject to personal interpretation when they dictate mandatory processes. This can lead to unintended consequences and a false sense of security regarding compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to the Volkswagen hiring assessment test. When faced with conflicting pressures, professionals should 1. Identify the core regulatory requirements and their implications. 2. Assess the potential risks associated with non-compliance. 3. Consult with relevant departments such as compliance or legal to ensure a thorough understanding of obligations. 4. Prioritize adherence to regulations, even if it means adjusting timelines or business plans. 5. Document all decisions and communications related to compliance matters. Question 16. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of the operating environment. When considering the introduction of a new electric vehicle model with advanced autonomous driving features, which of the following approaches best ensures regulatory compliance within the automotive sector? Option A. Focus on rapid prototyping and testing of the autonomous features to gain a competitive edge, with a plan to address regulatory requirements only after the technology is proven and a market launch is imminent. Option B. Prioritize market research and competitor analysis to identify consumer demand and potential sales volume, assuming regulatory approvals will be a straightforward administrative process. Option C. Delegate the responsibility for identifying and meeting regulatory requirements to the engineering team responsible for developing the autonomous driving software, with minimal oversight from senior management. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of all applicable national and international automotive safety standards, emissions regulations, and data privacy laws relevant to autonomous driving technology, engaging legal and compliance experts throughout the development lifecycle. The correct answer is B. Prioritize market research and competitor analysis to identify consumer demand and potential sales volume, assuming regulatory approvals will be a straightforward administrative process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between achieving business objectives and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The need to balance profitability with compliance, especially in a highly regulated industry like automotive manufacturing, demands careful judgment. Misinterpreting or overlooking regulatory nuances can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and even legal repercussions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and proactive integration of regulatory frameworks into strategic planning. This involves not just identifying applicable laws, but also interpreting their implications for business operations and product development. By engaging with legal and compliance experts early and often, the company ensures that its strategic initiatives are not only commercially viable, but also legally sound and ethically responsible. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of non-compliance and fosters a culture of integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on market trends without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal boundaries within which the company must operate. Specifically, It violates regulations that mandate adherence to safety standards, environmental protection laws, and consumer rights legislation. Such an approach risks developing products or strategies that are illegal to market or implement, leading to costly recalls, fines, and potential lawsuits. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over regulatory due diligence is also professionally unsound. This haste can lead to overlooking critical compliance checks, such as emissions testing, safety certifications, or data privacy requirements. The regulatory failure here is a direct breach of laws designed to protect public health, safety, and the environment. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and can result in severe penalties and a loss of consumer trust. A third incorrect approach that delegates regulatory oversight entirely to junior staff without senior management review is a failure of leadership and accountability. While junior staff may have operational knowledge, strategic decisions with significant regulatory implications require the experience and authority of senior leadership to ensure comprehensive understanding and appropriate risk management. This abdication of responsibility can lead to systemic compliance failures, as critical oversight and strategic alignment are missed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multidisciplinary approach. When developing strategic plans, professionals should 1. Identify all relevant regulatory frameworks applicable to the business and its proposed strategies. 2. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, evaluating potential compliance challenges and their impact. 3. Engage legal and compliance experts to interpret regulations and provide guidance. 4. Integrate compliance considerations into the core of the strategic planning process, not as an afterthought. 5. Establish clear lines of accountability for regulatory compliance at all levels of management. 6. Implement robust monitoring and auditing mechanisms to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent reduction in reported operational risk incidents over the past 2 fiscal years. However, a recent internal audit highlighted potential weaknesses in the control environment related to new product launches, which approach to assessing the effectiveness of the operational risk management framework would be most professionally sound and compliant with regulatory expectations. Option A. Delegate the assessment to the operational teams responsible for the new product launches, trusting their subjective judgment on control effectiveness without independent verification. Option B. Rely solely on the historical performance metrics, as the downward trend in incidents indicates a robust and effective risk management system. Option C. Focus on further reducing the number of reported incidents by implementing stricter reporting thresholds, even if this means some minor control deficiencies are not formally documented. Option D. Conduct a qualitative review of the control environment, assessing the design and operational effectiveness of controls in key risk areas, particularly those related to new product launches, and compare this against the firm's stated risk appetite. The correct answer is D. Conduct a qualitative review of the control environment, assessing the design and operational effectiveness of controls in key risk areas, particularly those related to new product launches, and compare this against the firm's stated risk appetite. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires evaluating the effectiveness of risk assessment methodologies in a dynamic business environment. The challenge lies in discerning which approach best aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities for a financial institution like Volkswagen, particularly concerning the identification and mitigation of operational risks. Careful judgment is required to move beyond superficial metrics and assess the underlying robustness of the risk management framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a forward-looking, qualitative assessment of risk appetite and the effectiveness of controls, rather than solely relying on historical quantitative data. This aligns with regulatory expectations that risk management should be proactive and integrated into strategic decision-making. Specifically, regulatory frameworks often mandate that institutions understand their risk appetite and ensure that their control environment is designed to operate within those boundaries. A qualitative review of control effectiveness, considering the inherent risks and the likelihood of control failure, provides a more nuanced and accurate picture than purely metric-driven analysis. This approach fosters a culture of continuous improvement and ensures that risk management is not merely a compliance exercise, but a strategic imperative. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the historical performance metrics without considering the underlying control environment or the evolving risk landscape fails to meet regulatory expectations for a comprehensive risk assessment. This approach risks overlooking emerging threats or the potential for control degradation, leading to a false sense of security. May also violate ethical obligations to act with due care and diligence, as it prioritizes easily quantifiable data over a thorough understanding of actual risk exposure. Another incorrect approach that relies on a subjective, unaudited assessment of risk without any form of validation or documentation is professionally unacceptable. This lacks the rigor required by regulators and exposes the firm to significant reputational and financial risk. It demonstrates a failure to establish and maintain adequate internal controls, a core requirement in most financial regulatory regimes. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes the reduction of reported risk incidents above all else, even if it means downplaying or ignoring underlying control weaknesses, is ethically compromised and regulatorily unsound. This approach incentivizes a superficial approach to risk management, where the appearance of control is valued over its actual effectiveness, can lead to a culture where risks are hidden rather than managed, ultimately increasing the likelihood of significant operational failures. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach to risk assessment. This includes 1. Understanding the firm's stated risk appetite and strategic objectives. 2. Evaluating both quantitative data, performance metrics, and qualitative factors, control environment, emerging risks, expert judgment. 3. Ensuring that risk assessment methodologies are regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changes in the business and regulatory landscape. 4. Maintaining robust documentation and validation processes for all risk assessments. 5. Fostering open communication about risks across all levels of the organization. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, highly secure data encryption system for client financial information would incur significant upfront costs and ongoing maintenance expenses, potentially impacting short-term profitability. However, a less expensive but less robust system is also available. The less robust system would meet minimum industry standards, but would not offer the same level of protection against sophisticated cyber threats. Considering the regulatory environment and the potential for severe penalties in case of a data breach, which approach best aligns with professional obligations? Option A. Outsource data management to a third-party vendor that offers the lowest cost solution, without conducting a thorough independent assessment of their security protocols. Option B. Invest in the highly secure data encryption system, prioritizing client data protection and regulatory compliance over immediate cost savings. Option C. Negotiate with regulators for a temporary waiver on enhanced security measures, citing the financial burden of the more secure system. Option D. Implement the less expensive, less robust system, assuming that meeting minimum industry standards is sufficient and the risk of a sophisticated breach is low. Correct answer is B. Invest in the highly secure data encryption system, prioritizing client data protection and regulatory compliance over immediate cost savings. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential financial gains against the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client data. The temptation to proceed with a less secure, but cheaper, data handling solution is significant, especially in a competitive environment. However, regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data protection and financial services, mandate a robust approach to risk management, prioritizing client confidentiality and security. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental principles of data protection and client trust. It acknowledges that the cost of a data breach, including regulatory fines, reputational damage, and loss of client confidence, far outweighs the initial savings from a less secure system. Adhering to regulatory requirements for data security, such as implementing strong encryption, access controls, and regular security audits, is not merely a compliance exercise but a core ethical duty. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to safeguarding sensitive information, which is paramount in the financial services industry. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings over security would represent a significant regulatory failure. Specifically, it would likely violate data protection laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or equivalent national legislation, by failing to implement adequate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care owed to clients, exposing them to potential harm from identity theft or financial fraud. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on vendor assurances without independent verification of their security protocols, also fails to meet the standard of due diligence required by regulators. This demonstrates a lack of independent risk assessment and an over-reliance on third parties, which can lead to unforeseen vulnerabilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a comprehensive risk assessment that goes beyond simple financial cost-benefit calculations. It requires identifying all potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and evaluating mitigation strategies. This process should be informed by relevant regulatory requirements, industry best practices, and a strong ethical compass. When faced with a choice between cost and security, professionals must always err on the side of caution, prioritizing the protection of client data and upholding regulatory compliance. The long-term consequences of a security lapse, including severe financial penalties and irreparable damage to reputation, underscore the importance of investing in robust security measures. Question 19. Strategic planning requires a robust framework for identifying and evaluating potential threats to business objectives. Considering Volkswagen's global operations and the dynamic automotive industry, which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations for proactive and comprehensive risk management? Option A. Adopting an informal, decentralized approach where individual departments are responsible for identifying and managing their own risks without a centralized oversight mechanism. Option B. Prioritizing risk assessment activities that are least costly to implement, even if it means a less detailed or systematic evaluation of potential threats. Option C. Implementing a comprehensive, top-down risk assessment process that integrates risk identification and analysis into the annual strategic planning cycle, utilizing scenario planning and emerging risk analysis. Option D. Relying primarily on post-incident reviews and historical data analysis to identify risks, with a focus on addressing issues that have already occurred. The correct answer is C. Implementing a comprehensive, top-down risk assessment process that integrates risk identification and analysis into the annual strategic planning cycle, utilizing scenario planning and emerging risk analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk mitigation with the imperative to maintain robust internal controls and compliance with regulatory expectations. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing risk assessment methodologies that are both practical for a large, complex organization like Volkswagen and sufficiently thorough to satisfy regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is not overly burdensome, but still provides adequate assurance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a structured, systematic, and forward-looking methodology for identifying, analyzing, and responding to potential risks. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate proactive risk management and the establishment of effective internal control systems. By integrating risk assessment into strategic planning, an organization demonstrates a commitment to embedding risk awareness into its decision-making processes, which is a key expectation of regulators. This proactive stance helps prevent adverse events and ensures that the organization operates within its risk appetite. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or future uncertainties fails to meet regulatory expectations for forward-looking risk assessment. Regulators expect organizations to anticipate potential future risks, not just react to past failures. Another incorrect approach that relies on informal or ad hoc risk identification methods lacks the necessary structure and documentation required for effective oversight and auditability. This can lead to inconsistent risk identification and an incomplete understanding of the organization's risk profile, potentially violating principles of good corporate governance and internal control. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction over the thoroughness of the risk assessment process risks creating blind spots and leaving the organization vulnerable to significant threats, which is contrary to the regulatory duty of care. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements and the organization's risk appetite. This involves identifying the objectives of the risk assessment, considering the scope and scale of the organization's operations, and evaluating different risk assessment methodologies for their suitability and effectiveness. The chosen approach should be documented, communicated, and regularly reviewed, and updated to ensure its continued relevance and efficacy. Question 20. Compliance review shows that a new cybersecurity vulnerability has been identified that could potentially impact customer data. The team responsible for addressing this vulnerability is considering how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant approach? Option A. Postpone any action until a comprehensive, long-term cybersecurity strategy is finalized, even if the vulnerability poses an immediate threat. Option B. Rely on informal discussions and the consensus of a few senior IT staff members to determine the best course of action, prioritizing speed over formal documentation. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact and likelihood of the vulnerability being exploited, evaluate existing security measures, and then design and implement appropriate, documented controls based on the assessment findings. Option D. Immediately deploy a complex, expensive security solution that has been effective in other industries, without a detailed analysis of its suitability or necessity for Volkswagen's specific environment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to understand the specific impact and likelihood of the vulnerability being exploited, evaluate existing security measures, and then design and implement appropriate, documented controls based on the assessment findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the need for efficient risk mitigation with the imperative to adhere to established regulatory frameworks and internal policies. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate and compliant method for addressing a newly identified risk, ensuring that the chosen approach is not only effective, but also legally sound and ethically defensible within the specific context of Volkswagen's operational and regulatory environment. The pressure to act quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that bypass necessary due diligence, making careful judgment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of risk assessment and control implementation, aligned with Volkswagen's internal risk management framework and relevant regulatory guidelines. This typically entails identifying the risk, analyzing its potential impact and likelihood, evaluating existing controls, and then determining if additional controls are necessary. If new controls are required, they must be designed, implemented, and monitored in accordance with established procedures. This methodical approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, compliant with regulations, such as those governing data privacy, financial reporting, or operational safety, depending on the risk, and auditable. It upholds professional integrity by demonstrating a commitment to robust governance and risk management, which is a cornerstone of responsible corporate behavior and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing a control without a thorough assessment of the risk's nature, impact, or likelihood. This bypasses the fundamental principles of risk management, potentially leading to the implementation of ineffective or disproportionate controls. It is a regulatory failure because it deviates from mandated risk assessment processes, and an ethical failure as it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for efficient resource allocation. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals to justify a particular control measure. This lacks the objectivity and rigor required by regulatory frameworks and internal policies, which often mandate evidence-based decision-making. This is a regulatory failure due to the absence of a systematic, documented risk analysis, and an ethical failure because it introduces bias and subjectivity into critical risk management decisions. A further incorrect approach is to delay implementation of any control measure indefinitely, citing a lack of complete information or resources. While thoroughness is important, an indefinite delay in the face of a recognized risk can lead to significant compliance breaches and potential harm. This is a regulatory failure as it neglects the duty to manage risks proactively, and an ethical failure as it exposes the organization and its stakeholders to unnecessary and avoidable harm. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. First, clearly define the identified risk and its potential implications. Second, consult Volkswagen's established risk management policies and procedures, as well as any applicable regulatory guidance. Third, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, gathering relevant data and expert input. Fourth, evaluate potential control measures based on their effectiveness, feasibility, and compliance with regulations. Fifth, document the entire process, including the rationale for the chosen control and any rejected alternatives. Finally, ensure the implemented control is monitored and reviewed periodically. This systematic approach ensures that risk management is integrated into business operations in a compliant, ethical, and effective manner.